Love him or hate him, Ben Shapiro clearly has a spotlight on him. So who is the Ben Shapiro of the left? Is there a Ben Shapiro of the left? Is this the clickbait to get you to watch this video? I think the answer probably is sort of, but also, I think it's an important question, and there's a reason. Ben Shapiro is obviously a special character right now on the right. You don't have to look farther than just Googling Ben Shapiro. You'll come up with dozens, hundreds, thousands of articles lauding him, hating him. Protests around his speeches are massive. He has bazillions of followers on social media. He's not hiding it either. He'll talk about it openly, how he is a massive success. But what's so compelling about him? I don't think it's what people think it is. People seem to think it's because of his articulate arguments and his elocution. But I don't believe that. You know, a few years ago, a reporter, I tried to find the article and I couldn't, went around asking college kids about their political opinions. He wrote in his article that about a third of kids unbidden brought up Ben Shapiro. But there was no character on the left who they brought up as consistently among the left-leaning students. I had a similar experience. I was a 12th grade teacher for 3 years in high school, taught U.S. politics. And I also had students who would come over to me and they would say, who is the Ben Shapiro of the left? And the reason they'd ask that, by the way, and I take this as a compliment to my own teaching style, is because I was very pushy of the idea that you really have to have a balanced diet in your politics, which is why I personally follow people on the right and the left. But when people would ask me who the Ben Shapiro of the left is, I didn't really have a good answer. And that bothered me. Why not? Who is the Ben Shapiro of the left? Is there somebody on the left who destroys liberals with facts and logic? Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't find that compelling anyway. I never liked those clips. I don't think that's why people watch Ben Shapiro. I think that's a stupid idea to think that that's why he's so popular. There are plenty of people on the right who can deliver great zingers. And there are plenty of people on the left who can too. So what is compelling about him? I'm going to give you my theory. And you know what? I think I can back it up. People are attracted to good character. That's just the reality. When you meet somebody who has good, positive character traits, who you see as a morally virtuous person, there's a certain attraction that you have. You want to be close to that person. You want to listen to that person's advice and hear what he has to say. I think it's one of the reasons why Trump was very unsuccessful in being an attractive president to so many people. Even among people who sort of like went along with it and said, you know what, I guess I'll take Trump because he supports the issues that I support. They weren't particularly thrilled with him. There was only a small faction of people in this country who were thrilled with Trump. For the most part, it was a sort of tolerance and an alliance. He represents us. Do you know why? Because people could see his moral failings. They're so obvious and open. Right? Well, one really good, moral, virtuous thing is when a person means what they say and says what they mean. Right? If their heart and their expressions and the way they talk are consistent. And you know what? That's a character that I think Ben Shapiro has. And I think that's the thing that makes him so popular and so attractive, especially to so many young people. We live in a world that is filled with dishonesty. A guy like Ben Shapiro comes along and he says something, and you can rely not on whether he's right or wrong exactly, which that's a different discussion. I'm not saying he is or isn't. But you know that he means, when Ben Shapiro says something, Ben Shapiro means the thing he said. Isn't everyone like that? No. And we'll explain. We'll explain why. But again, I want to just explain clearly. I don't mean that means he's always right or always says the truth. But if he doesn't say the truth, it's not because he is deliberately lying. It's because he was wrong by accident. Ben Shapiro has been wrong before. And you know what? He's admitted it when confronted with the facts, and he'll explain. Not on page 27 in some tiny little byline, but front and center, I've heard him on videos say, this is why I was wrong. Here's how I got to my wrong conclusion. Here's what's changed and what I now know to be true. And I'm sorry that I was wrong. That's impressive, right? But again, does he ever come out and know that something might not be true, know that he's presenting a false view of the world, and knowingly promote it? I've never heard him do that, and I've watched thousands of Ben Shapiro episodes. I've never heard him do that. To just walk out and just shamelessly promote a viewpoint that, not even if it's for sure not true, but might not be true. Let's compare that, for example, to most of the characters in the mainstream media. By the way, right and left, even though I'm picking on the left right now because this story just broke today, and I think it's a great illustration of this difference. Let's highlight it. Bam. Greg Greenwald, great reporter, posted about Brian Sicknick. Now, if you don't know, Brian Sicknick, it's not about Brian Sicknick per se, but about what they used him to do. And this is a really important thread. You should read it by Glenn if you have time. Glenn points out that Brian Sicknick, when he died, it was pretty clear immediately that it was probably not related to the violence at the Capitol. His sister came out and said that she spoke to him that night and he was fine. He ended up being rushed to the hospital where he died. Is it possible that maybe he wouldn't have died if there hadn't been a riot? Yes, but is there any provable real connection? No. And yet, many news agencies and very popular personalities who are on the news came out in lockstep, in unison. And they said that Brian Sicknick was beaten to death by a bloodthirsty mob. Some people used those exact words. Now, if Greg Greenwald and people like him, like Matt Taibbi and Jimmy Dore and many others, said right away, there's no real way to know if this is true. It might be true, but it also might not. Right? And the facts are not there to present this narrative in a way that expresses that there was a bloodthirsty mob. That's just a dishonest narrative, even if it might be true. But when you express it in the way that the news media did, you're expressing something that you know might not be true, right? If they knew that, and these are not people with multi-billion-dollar or even multi-million-dollar budgets, then you best believe that the people at CNN, NBC, MSNBC, etc., they all knew it as well, right? And yet, their hosts came out and said, Brian Sicknick was beaten to death by a bloodthirsty mob. That means that they're willing to come out and present a narrative that they know in their heart may or may not be true. And we see numerous examples of this. And again, I'm picking on the left, but I think that's true even on Fox, which is why there is no shining personality on Fox that commands that, I honestly believe this, among the youth, that same attraction. There are very few people who I would hold up and say, this person really means in their heart what they're presenting to you almost 100% of the time. And when not, it's usually as a result of a mistake or an immaturity. And if educated, they will rise to that. Very few people. Certainly nobody on the mainstream media. This is just one example, but we could take many others. How many times did we hear the mainstream media say that Donald Trump was certainly a traitor? Again, whether or not you approve of Russiagate or hate Russiagate, the idea that Donald Trump was definitely a traitor was something they knew might not be true. That he was actively involved personally as an agent of Russia in committing treason is something that they were well aware might not be true. And yet they went on and presented it with no compunction. That's crazy. It is. And it's very unattractive to a thinking person who's concerned with virtue. Well, what about people like, let's say, late night TV hosts? You have Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Trevor Noah, John Oliver, the great granddaddy and founder of the movement, really, Jon Stewart. I was a fan of Jon Stewart. I used to watch The Daily Show every day. But the older I got, the more dubious I found many of their, again, narrative claims. Very often I would watch something and I would know about it and I would be like, the way he's presenting this, it sort of pushes a certain viewpoint that may or may not be true. And that bothered me a lot. You know, when it comes to Stephen Colbert, I can't really play for you the video clip of the example I want because it was so inappropriate. But he was very heavily promoting the idea of Donald Trump being a traitor, not just being involved in some vague way, or his campaign did something not appropriate, or Russia may with Facebook ads and then Trump didn't care to stop them. No, the idea that Donald Trump personally was involved with Vladimir Putin, they had some kind of a relationship, he was some kind of an agent, he hated America. Like, these were all narratives that Colbert allowed to be presented as real and true. Even if you couldn't catch him on the exact language, he could maybe say, well, I never said it openly. But it was very obvious from many clips that you could find yourself that he did present that narrative, which, and it's no question that he knew that it may or may not be true. So again, he's not the Ben Shapiro of the left then, because the idea is there someone on the left who only ever will express something that he knows is true, or at the very least will say, you know, as Ben Shapiro always says, this is kind of frankly one of his like annoyingest things that people hate about him, is he always says, we have to wait for the evidence, we have to wait for the evidence, we have to wait for the evidence. I personally, almost so many clips that I've seen of him over the course of Russiagate, He refused to even say, it's not true, right? Which would have made Trump supporters so happy. But he wouldn't say that. He would say, there's not enough evidence for me to say definitively it's not true. I don't think it's true. He would make it very clear. My opinion is that it's not true. I don't believe that it would be true, but we have to wait for the evidence. That was not what Stephen Colbert was saying. Stephen Colbert was not saying, I think it's true, but we have to wait for the evidence and we should know. He was saying very, very strong things to indicate that he did believe it, and some very vulgar things as well. And again, I can't play the clip. But let's take another one. Let's just take, again, we could go through this with all of these people. Jimmy Kimmel, Trevor Noah, Jon Stewart, but I'm just going to pick right now. John Oliver certainly has crazy clips where he presents narratives that, again, he knows are either not true or might not be true, but doesn't say that. But let's just pick on Trevor Noah for a second, because a clip came out. Again, it's just recent. And in my opinion, I think that this clip is crazy, and that's why I'm picking it. So here's Trevor Noah, and he's talking about culture wars, and he's covering such topics as trans rights. And here's him talking about Republicans.
What I love about Republicans is that when it comes to major issues with tons of evidence, like climate change or coronavirus.
Now, that's it. That's all I wanted to play for you. When it comes to issues with tons of evidence, like climate change has tons of evidence? Do you know that the idea that our world is going to be doomed because of climate change is well over 100 years old? I found this with just a moment of Googling, and that's something I also knew. Like, I've been aware of this idea my whole life. In 1969, the New York Times wrote in an article that the Arctic pack ice is thinning, and the ocean at the North Pole may become an open sea within a decade or two. That did not happen. This is not even a comprehensive list, by the way. I know for sure, even though I can't remember off the top of my head where these claims are to be found, and I tried Googling for them and I couldn't find them. But I know for sure I've seen on television people who have said things like, if we don't do XYZ by X time, the damage will be irreversible and it's period. We're done. We're doomed. And it's not, here we are. How many times would somebody have to come and say the same thing for you to question that? If a guy came and said, me and a team of scientists have studied, everybody in the city drinks from this well. And we're here to tell you that you have maybe a year or two or a decade, right? Or 15 to 20 years maximum. If we don't get the majority of the population to stop drinking from this well, we're irreversibly doomed. Not just doomed. There will be no way to fix the problem after that point, right? And then, for some reason, let's imagine that there's just a lot of people who are ridiculous conspiracy, whoever, I don't care, make up your own story. They don't listen. And the scientists are screaming and fighting and yelling and crying, and people are supporting them, and they have a whole movement behind them, and there's millions of dollars spent, and nothing helps. The people don't listen. Now 20 years pass. The scientists come back, and they say, guys, we have to stop drinking from the well, or in 12 years, we will all be irreversibly doomed. Wait, what? 20 years ago, you told it. Aren't we irreversibly doomed now? Now, aren't we now irreversibly doomed and there's nothing we can do about it? No. In 12 years. Okay. Now 12 years go by. Again, people didn't listen, despite the screaming and the urging and the pleas. Again, right or wrong, people didn't listen. Now the scientists come back and they say, guys, we have 7 more years or else we're... What? Wouldn't you just lock them up in a mental asylum? And yet, Trevor Noah knows this. He's not stupid. He knows that claims about the climate and predictions of total doom, not just simple things, total doom, climatological weather aberrations may be the harbinger of another ice age. That was in 1974. Okay. Yes, it's true that this Paul Errol quote is taken a little out of context. He was talking about overpopulation, but he said, again, this is a scientist talking about sciencey stuff. England will not exist in the year 2000. Right? Fortune magazine won an award for presenting a doom and gloom picture with dates about how long we have to protect the world that were all wrong. They won a science award for that. It's unbelievable. The threat of a new ice age must now stand alongside nuclear war as a likely source of wholesale death and misery for mankind. Right? in the near future, I remember, by the way, again, I was not alive in 1974, but I remember years ago hearing about this article. I think I heard about it in my own politics class in high school, about the fact that this article was shockingly wrong. That in 1974, the New York Times predicted mass death, starvation, anarchy, and violence. I remember as a kid growing up in the 90s, hearing people talk about how world governments might collapse into anarchy. And yet, here's Trevor Noah saying, right? Again, he's saying, again, isn't that question not, is he right or wrong? The question is, does he know that there is a possibility that what he's saying might not be 100% true? Yes, there's no question he knows that. And yet he's not presenting it that way. He's not saying when it comes to things that Republicans should agree we need to be more careful about, but somehow ignore. That's not what he's saying. When it comes to things that we know are true, he knows that we don't know that for sure. He's well aware of that. But he doesn't care. He's presenting a narrative. Now, in case we wanted to, we could have picked, frankly, in my opinion, the much better clip that nobody talks about. This is honestly one of the most dishonest things I've ever seen, is when he says this. Let's just listen to this.
Joe Biden is boring. I mean, he promised it, but man, the guy has delivered. This dude's favorite Netflix show is just the search menu, which is fine for most people, right? People don't want to be paying attention to their president every day. But it's a big problem for right-wing pundits and politicians. Because, you see, they can't depend on him to generate outrage.
That's a really shocking thing to say. Because you know who it's even more bad news for? Or it should be more bad news for? What he should have said was, this is really bad news for comedy. Because what are we supposed to talk about? We can't talk about how making fun of the president and his policies like we did every single night almost. I don't want to present something that's not true. It might have been like a few nights that I missed that weren't. But virtually every single night for 4 years, multiple late night TV hosts basically sat there and made joke after joke about Donald Trump, right? And we just can't find those jokes to make about Joe Biden because he's just so boring. He knows that's a lie. There are gold mines. They weren't making polite jokes about Donald Trump. They were making serious, like when they made jokes about kids at the border, they would make jokes about terrible things that were happening. And they would say them in terrible and edgy, shocking ways, because as many comedians in our generation do, they have no problem being shocking and saying things that are over the top and, bordering on like whatever. They can't find anything to say about Joe Biden? Really? Joe Biden, who campaigned on $15 an hour and turned around and totally abandoned the $15 an hour routine? Joe Biden, who promised over and over and over again that he was going to get the kids out of the cages, and the cages are now overflowing? Again, I don't care whose fault it is. You go. They can't find a joke in there? There's no joke in there that they could find? It's so ridiculous. Joe Biden's so boring. I can't think of a single joke to make about any of his policies. He's lying. He knows there's plenty of good jokes to make about Joe Biden. He's well aware of that, but he doesn't want to make them. So instead of saying, instead of saying we could focus on Joe Biden, but I think it would be better for us to focus on the Republicans and then launch his comedy routine. Instead, he's presenting the narrative. He's making the point that there's just no comedy here. Joe Biden is just outside the realm of comic creativity. Anybody who's watching this, who has an attraction to moral sincerity and moral virtue and doesn't want their own preconceived notions and ideas to be fed into, is going to be turned off. And so that's why he's not the Ben Shapiro of the left, and that's why none of them are. Okay, what about people like independent media pundits? Right? There's a growing world of those. People like Ryan Grimm of The Intercept, a hard-hitting investigative reporter. Honestly, if you would have asked me that question 2 years ago, I would have said I think Ryan Grimm is maybe a little dry and not as exciting, but on a sort of like deep level, perhaps. I've certainly heard many a Ryan and read many a Ryan Grimm story. I don't know if he's been around for 2 years. To be honest, I'm not sure how long he's been around. I haven't been following him for that long, but he's been on my radar for a long time at this point. So, don't check my dates. But I've been a big fan of his for quite a while. And great. But you know what? Recently I realized he does the same thing. I mean, again, you can do this however you want, But if you just want to like see for yourself, just go to YouTube and search YouTube for Jimmy Dore, Ryan Grimm, and just look at Jimmy Dore and Ryan, and look at his videos. Here, look at this search query. You have to see these videos where Jimmy Dore really just lays out fact after fact. These are not really difficult things to argue with. And I haven't seen any counter arguments being raised that are valid. Where he just shows that Ryan Grimm, again, it's not that he is a big fat liar always. That's not what he's saying. Even though a lot of the people who are deflecting these arguments are pretending that's what he's saying. He's not saying that Ryan Grimm is always a big fat liar. He's not saying that Ryan Grimm is a terrible person. He's saying that Ryan Grimm has gone out and presented narratives as true that he is, and I'm being generous in my wording, at the very least aware may not be true without promoting that. That he'll go out and he'll say, this is why certain politicians acted a certain way, even though he knows that that may not be true. So what's being expressed is not what's consistent with what's in his heart. So I don't think he could be the Ben Shapiro of the left. What about Cenk Uygur? I mean, anybody who thinks that Cenk Uygur could be the Ben Shapiro of the left, I don't know what to tell you. He's far worse than Ryan Grimm. Cenk Uygur has often come out and said things that he himself later had to reverse on. I mean, the force the vote controversy, for those who are not on the left, I just have to tell you that the force the vote controversy is a fantastic example. Where there were certain people who were saying that the squad and their allies should not vote for Nancy Pelosi because there was a 6-vote majority on the side of the Democrats to vote for the next Speaker of the House. And there were many people promoting the idea that if there are 30 progressives or 30 people who claim to be progressives in Congress, why not all 30 of you band together and say, Nancy, we're not voting for you unless you promise us certain things. And since you need our votes, because you're only 6 votes, over, you're not going to be able to get in. And Cenk Uygur came out and he said, this is terrible and it's bad optics and we can't present an opposition. Plus, if we do this, the Republicans might get to appoint the leader. And by the way, which was not true. The Republicans don't get to appoint the leader. If there's no majority, you redo the vote and there's other procedures. And he knew that. He was told that. And he still came out and said it. And then later, when there was an issue that he wanted these people, he reversed his position. And he said, you know what, maybe progressives should use their power in exactly this way. So why didn't he do it then? Because he didn't want to. He believed strongly that it was the wrong thing to do. And therefore, he was willing to come out and present things that he knew weren't true. He was willing to say things that may be true, may not be true, things that he knew for sure weren't true, things that he partially thought were true, but express them with conviction to convince people who are listening to him. So he can't be the Ben Shapiro of the left. Because he's not consistent with what's in his heart that he knows. He might be consistent with what's ideologically in his heart, but if you're willing to twist reality and not willing to twist yourself, right? You can say, look, what's in my heart is this is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. And even though I know that the facts are, but he didn't do that. He came out and he said, this is what we have to do, and I'm right, and everybody else is wrong, and there's nothing else to talk about. And that's not consistent. He knows that that's not true. He knows that he was saying something that there's alternative viewpoints. What about people like Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty? I mean, I've done many a video about Crystal and Sagar. I did a whole teardown of this clip when it was longer, but you know what? I'll just play the relevant portion for you.
Finally, the lesson to me is this, and this is the one a lot of conservatives are not going to want to hear. At the end of the day, going all in to defend apps like Parler is not the answer. Why?
Going all in to defend apps like Parler is not the answer. This was part of a longer clip, which I urge you to go listen to, about why conservatives are wrong to defend apps like Gab, Parler, etc., when a lot of extremists hang out. At the end of the day, his argument becomes more and more spirally, where he says that really what conservatives should do is we should embrace the idea of social media only being safe for people who are in the middle. Left extremists and right extremists should be kicked out. And Crystal agrees with him, essentially embracing common sense censorship. Yes, Jimmy Dore and Steph Zamorano, that credit goes to you. What? Is that an honest take? There is no honest person who can call themselves a liberal or a progressive, or Sagar who presents himself as conservative or whatever, even though he's a conservative on the left. But there's no way to present yourself as honest and say that. You know that censorship is bad. In fact, again, I turn to Glenn because he said this best. Glenn Greenwald, while talking to Jimmy Dore about this topic, said, using the utilitarian argument of we shouldn't ban Trump from social media because maybe next they'll ban you if they don't like your opinions, he said is terrible. Because it gives the impression that that's why it's wrong. It's wrong because of you. He said it's wrong because it's morally wrong. Silencing people is wrong. Even if it's a private company, even if they have the power to do that, we would not want the phone company to shut down phone conversations between neo-Nazis. I hate neo-Nazis as much as the next person, but I don't want to live in a country where the phone company can do that. If social media is being used as a public platform, and that's an important debate that we need to have anyway, but that's not the debate that Sagar is having in this clip. Sagar is acknowledging that that is true. He's saying what we should embrace as a country is common sense censorship. What a terrible take. And one that I think he knows he's intellectually smart enough to know from a historical perspective is not consistent with what he wants it to be. The utopia that he is promoting could be achieved with common sense censorship, he knows cannot be achieved. And so that's my opinion why he can't be the Ben Shapiro of the left. Finally, the last category of people I want to discuss is people who do say what they mean. People who are consistent in their heart and with what they express. I put into that noble category such people who I extremely disagree with, like Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, Tim Pool, and others. People who I disagree with about many of their core beliefs. But you know what? I respect them because they say what they mean. They mean what they say. Even when it hurts them, even when it's uncomfortable. But you know what? The problem is that the left rejects them. People like Greg Greenwald, I said Glenn? Glenn Greenwald. People like Greg. People like Glenn Greenwald and people like Jimmy Dore have been largely rejected by the left. The left has said, we don't want you on our team. We don't want you on our side. We don't respect you. And when I say the left unfortunately is kind of split into shambles about this. But the mainstream left is pretty consistently against them. It's only the fringe left, maybe that left that is more honest about what they want, is really pro them. But the bulk, the majority, the left that dominates mainstream media, they've rejected them and kicked them out of the bubble, kicked them out of the tent. And so I don't think they can be considered the Ben Shapiro of the left. If the left is split on how they view them and largely rejects them, and that's unfortunate because those people are at least worthy of some respect. And that's why I don't think there is a Ben Shapiro of the left. Because the left doesn't seem to respect people who have consistent and honest beliefs. And by that, I don't just mean consistent and honest beliefs, but people who will uncompromisingly not twist anything to align with how they have to express themselves. People who will say, although I hate it, I think Trump was right on this one. Or, I think that this is wrong, but I know I might be wrong about that, and here's why we need to be careful in how we express it. Those types of nuanced views don't seem very welcome on the left anymore. And it's interesting, and that probably needs its own video. But in short, I think if you want to attract people, and you want to be attractive to people, and you want to be on top of a political movement that's going to make that real change, I think you have to be the type of person who expresses himself in a way that's sincere and consistent with your own beliefs. And I hope that somebody like that does arise to be a leader on the left. Because it's needed. This is the Blazing Laser Show, and I'm Blazing Laser. Please subscribe, like, comment. All those things are mandatory, apparently, for me to succeed on this platform. And if you liked any of this content and you're still watching after 29 minutes, please do that.